Years ago, we decided that there were going to be no founders, that everyone that came to Cocaine Anonymous were essentially founders. But then we changed our mind a few years ago. But don't tell Bill about it. We won't mention it. Nah. Hey, how you doing? Okay. Let's see. It is a pleasure to be in Atlanta. I'm picking up the accent already. I've been traveling around the South for the last 2 weeks in Alabama, Mississippi, with my girlfriend, and people have greeted us with warmth and hospitality, but nothing quite like what you get when you come to a Cocaine Anonymous convention. There is definitely something magical and mystical that happens here. I heard a now a new friend speak today about the magic that happens here. Well, I've had the opportunity through these last 13 years in Cocaine Anonymous to see the magic. Originally, there was a piece of literature even that mentioned that there was a magic in the rooms of Cocaine Anonymous. You work the steps, and you experience a transformation, a magical transformation. And it was actually taken out of the literature because most of the people that were working on the literature hadn't worked all 12 steps. And through the years, and I was like fighting for that word. It was like, I want that word magic in there because I was stubborn. And the truth of the matter is through the years, well, how did you know I was talking then? Just kidding. No, for those of you that are just listening to the tape and aren't here in the room, I want you to know that the people in the back of the room are all naked. You're really missing quite a sight. Anyway, I was thinking about, I've met so many people over the years and had the opportunity to hear a lot of stories of how people ended up here in Cocaine Anonymous, ended up changing their lives, ended up, working steps and making friends and having their lives restored or at least begun. Some people had no life to restore. And then I was reminded of the New York World Service Convention, which was in 1989. Had it right on the tip of your tongue. And in '89, I had the opportunity to talk at the banquet. Someone else was supposed to talk. He didn't show, so I got to talk. And we had I had a friend of mine, a good friend of mine named Ted Kaplan, who had this nephew who was a practicing cocaine addict. And we basically talked his nephew, Kenny, into coming to the convention, to the banquet, because we promised him we'd introduce him to a lot of beautiful women. And that was what we told him. And I want you all to know that we are both rigorously honest. And so Kenny came to meet women, and at one point we were going on in the banquet, like we will most likely during the banquet this weekend, and we'll have a sobriety countdown. And that particular weekend we had a sobriety countdown, and for a lot of people it's the most exciting part of a convention. For some reason it's just all of us sort of rising to some occasion to celebrate each of our sobrieties along with everyone else's. And it's like a big birthday. You hear me in the back? Well, put your clothes on. So they started the sobriety countdown, 20 years, and nobody stood up, and 19, nobody stood up. And it kept going down, 10 years, 9 years, and people would get up, and everybody chant and cheer and start to stomp, and we got down to 3 years, and then 1 year, and everybody's like screaming. Everyone's just roaring. There's about 700 people there. They are pumped. This is like a major group rush. It was like everyone had just grabbed the pipe and went, let's have the countdown. And especially everyone began to exhale when it got to like 90 days, 60 days, 30 days, 29 days, 28 days. During this time, I was talking to this guy, Kenny, And they start reading down on 28 days, 27 days. And I say, Kenny, how long have you been, when was the last time you got loaded? And he goes, Johnny, you know, I'm not a member here. I'm not trying to get sober. And somebody goes, 20 days, 19 days. Yeah, but how long have you been actually not had any drugs? And he said, well, I don't really remember. And 10 days, 9 days. And he said, you know, I just, you know, maybe, and they said 3 days, 2 days. And he said, I think, you know, probably last night was the last day. And they said, 1 day. And I said, this guy over here. And, you know, they say we're not here to humiliate each other, but it's not. Just sometimes when it helps. And so everyone starts to cheer. Everyone gets up. You know, that's the thing. Everyone gets up and starts to cheer for this guy who's got 1 day of sobriety, whether he knows it or not. And everyone starts to chant, keep coming back, keep coming. And he wants to get the hell out of there so fast. If you could just given him an invisible pill, he would have taken it. But he couldn't, because we were surrounding him, right? And then he found out that he had to go to the front of the room and be given the banner and a book, you know, to be given from the person with the most sobriety. And he was just so humiliated, and he just crawled up to the front, and everyone, keep coming back. Everyone's cheering and yaying, and they turned around, and the guy with the most sobriety, a girl with the most sobriety, gave him the book, and he grabs it, and he tries to take off as fast as he can, but we won't let him. And basically we said, get up there and tell us who you are. And he crawled up to the microphone, and he said, my name is Kenny, and I'm, and he started to cry. He just burst into tears. He just burst into tears and started to cry. And he said, I guess I'm a drug addict. And what is this, 1996? So I guess he's got 7 years of sobriety now. So altogether, I guess what that means is it doesn't matter how you got here or why you're here. The fact of the matter is we are all here. It doesn't matter if you're sober today or not sober. What matters is you're here, you know, and that I'm here for me, you know. It gets so easy to forget that this is a disease and not a contest. It's not a contest to see who can get the most marbles. It's just a disease. No more complicated or simple than that. It's a bitch, though. I was thinking about a wonderful opportunity I had to go speak in Wisconsin at the. All those people were there, and I was talking. Let me get this right. Oh no, I made a mistake. That was in Montana. I've also been to Wisconsin. Great cheese. Love your cheese. Anybody from Montana? Now you're afraid to say in case I switch it to another state. Anyway, actually, a good thing happened in Wisconsin. Nice thing happened. I spoke at some meetings in Wisconsin at the Menominee Indian Reservation, and I gave this talk. I thought I felt pretty good about the talk, and I gave this talk. And later that night, I was at the gambling casino, and I was pulling down the slots, putting my quarters in, I'm playing the slots, feeling real cool. And this lady comes up to me, and she's like really drunk, and she's holding a beer, and she walks up and she starts pointing at me, and she says, "I know you." And I said, "Hi." And she said, "I heard you speak today, didn't I?" And I said, yeah. And she said, "That was a great talk." I said, well, thank you. I'm glad you liked it, but, you're drunk, and you're drinking a beer. And she stopped, and she looked at the beer like that. And she looked at me, she says, "Yeah. You drove me to it." So if I can help drive anyone anywhere, it'd be my pleasure. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Well, yeah, I did. Excuse me, dear. Anyway, in Montana, I was speaking in the Wolf Mountains up there as part of the Crow Reservation, and I'm not actually a Native American, although I'm a sort of a wannabe. So I get to go to some reservation. Actually, it's the first time I've ever been asked. We were in Mississippi, Alabama. A little girl at the checkout counter said, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" I said, Sure. What is it? She says, "Are you an Indian?" I said, "No, but thank you." She gave me the strangest look. So after we were done, I went up there with a buddy of mine. We went and talked and spent the weekend with these kids who were addicted to cocaine and addicted to a lot of sniffables and stuff, gasoline, anything that was cheap that you could go and forget what universe you were in. And afterwards, the counselors of this particular group, these guys that were part of the reservation, invited us to take a sweat ceremony with them. And I had never done a sweat ceremony. I didn't know what a sweat ceremony was. But one thing I haven't learned in sobriety necessarily is to ask a question when I don't know the answer. You know, I come from the drug addict school of somebody says, "Would you like to try some of this?" And I go, "Yeah." You don't want to say no and, have the opportunity to miss out on something. Like death. We ripped off that bastard, didn't we? So we go into this guy's house. We go to this guy's house, and there are three of us, I think, 3 or 4 of us, my friend, my buddy, and I, and these 2 guys. And they built this huge fire outside their house. Huge fire with these lava rocks in the middle, right? It's just blazing. And behind it is this little domed room, about, yay high and, well, bigger than my arm, so I can't really show you. Caught a fish this big. And now, that's when I first realized that we were supposed to go in there, into that little room, and they were going to bring the rocks in the room, and we were, it was going to be like a sauna thing. The only one problem was I'm exceptionally claustrophobic. And even thinking about going into this little room made me begin to, panic. My heart started doing that, that was not good Coke feel, Too much goddamn speed in that. Do you think we can get some more tonight? So, the guy went on to tell us that what we had to do was we were going to strip down naked and go get some chokecherry bushes, little branches on the chokecherry bush, tie them together with a little rope or twig or twine that they had there, and we would use that to beat ourselves with while we were in this little room naked with the steam going on. And I'm beginning to, what I basically do is when I get nervous, I'll make a joke, let's get the fuck out of here. And, and they start to pressure me, right? Everyone's, all of a sudden, we're spiritual, recovering people. All of a sudden, we're in the locker room. We're men. We're men, and you're either going to be a man or we're going to tell everybody. And so I said, okay, what happens? We got the bushes, and we got ready, and we all got stripped down. They put the rocks in the little domed room, and as soon as they put the rocks in there, all of a sudden a truck came up, and about 8 more guys came out of the truck. And I'm thinking, oh, shit. And they start taking off their clothes. And I realized they're coming into this little room with the claustrophobic and these other guys, and I did not like it. But by then it was too late, and they had gotten me into the little domed room, and I was I tried to sit next to the door, and they wouldn't let me, so I was pushed in the back, surrounded by these guys, and I'm looking around. I'm not feeling real comfortable, and all of a sudden what the guy does, the leader of the thing, is he grabs some dirt, and he holds it up, and he says, "Now we'll take a little time to bless the earth." And I went, okay, I can get behind that. That works for me. He's trying to slow me down, get me into the moment. Okay, I understand. We do that. And then he says, and now we're going to take a deep breath. And everyone took a deep breath, and he says, now we're going to bless the air. And we took a deep breath, and we all blessed the air. And I started calming down a little bit, and he says, and now we're going to drink of the water and bless the water that God has given us. And we all take a sip and pass it on, and take a sip and pass it on, and I'm beginning to go, okay, this could be all right, you know. And next thing I heard and saw at the same time was the flap. I didn't know there was a door on this little domed room, and it was a flap. The flap came down, putting us in pitch darkness, and at that point the guy says, and now we're going to be grateful for the pain and suffering we're about to experience. And I went, wait a minute! That wasn't in the contract, and I wanted to get there. My heart just about exploded out of my chest. All of a sudden, they pour all the water on these rocks, right? It is hot. I'm talking about hot. I've been in steam rooms. They were not like this. I felt like a boiled chicken. And these guys start to beat themselves with these chokeberry bushes, right? They're beating themselves. What that does is that puts all the hot air, blows all the hot air away from people into the idiot that's not beating himself with the chokeberry bushes, which is me. I'm too busy having an anxiety attack. I'm hyperventilating. I can't breathe. I'm dying. It's hot. I didn't know where to go to. Everyone's making all this noise, and I'm freaking out. And I'm thinking, okay, if I get up and run out towards the door, I might fall in the pit and burn something I might need later. And I'm just dying there. And all of a sudden, the guy says, if any of you are having problems breathing or with panic, lie down on your stomach, and on the bottom 2 inches towards the ground, there'll be more air. And I'm thinking, I'm in a room with like 10 naked strangers beating themselves with chokecherry bushes, and they're telling me to lie on my stomach. I mean, I've said that before, but I've never done it before. You know? And I laid on my stomach, and I'm like trying to grab something from the earth there, and I'm trying to breathe, and I just was about to explode. I tell you, it was the most pressure, most fear that I've had in my sobriety. I can't tell you how afraid I was and how panicked I was. And I'm breathing, and I'm thinking, I'm going to die. I'm going to die unless I get out of here, but there's no way out. There was no way. I couldn't figure one thing to do other than to be there and suffer in this torturous heat. And all of a sudden, I realized that I had an option. And the option was this. I had this option that I could stop everything in my mind and completely trust in God. Completely trust in God. And I could do more than that. I could completely trust in these strangers, these naked strangers around me, that they were in fact not there to hurt me, and that they were in fact there to take me on a journey and to teach me something I never knew before. And I made those 2 decisions. And they kept chanting this Indian chant of, and I found myself chanting. I started chanting, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can. God grant me the serenity to... And I started doing that, and all of a sudden, my friends started to chant the serenity prayer with me. And all of a sudden, all the guys in the tent started to chant the serenity prayer. And all of a sudden, I found myself sitting up in the heat, and realizing that it wasn't as hot as I thought it was. And I started to beat myself with my chokecherry bushes. Fucking chokecherry bushes. And I started to breathe in and breathe out, and I started to experience a connectedness with these invisible strangers in this dark, small room. And before I even got into it, the flap went flying up. Somebody put up the flap, and a bunch of these guys, you know, my friend who had laughed at me so much, she still has scars on his knees from bolting out of there so fast. But I only mention that to him when I see him. But the truth of the matter was all of a sudden, all this cool air rushed in. All this cool air rushed in. And I felt it. And there was a flap in the back, and I lay down and I looked out the back, and there were the mountains, and you could see snow on the mountains. And I noticed that a few of the guys that had initiated this ceremony were looking at each other and sort of looking at me, and they're all giving each other the nod. You guys know the nod. It's the one we all give each other when we see someone new saying something we've said before or doing something we've done before, and knowing that they're going to have to find out for themselves. That telling them is not going to be the answer. Just loving them is going to be the answer, letting them find out. Well, they were giving each other the nod. And I felt good being the one that had to learn. And I felt good that I stayed there. And what I remembered at that point was all of you. And I realized that when I came to Cocaine Anonymous, I came here knowing nothing, afraid of everything, feeling like there was no way out, feeling like there was nothing I could do to stop this anxiety, these electrical shocks going through my system, feeling like it was over and there was no way that I even knew how to die. I had botched dying up so many times. I once took 40 Nembutal and was in a coma for 4 days because I knew there was no answer to life. I knew that there was no help for me. And I came here and you guys said, you know what, Johnny? Stick around. Sometimes it's going to get real hot. Sometimes you're going to get real scared. But if you live the serenity prayer, instead of just saying it, and you stick around and you recognize that these strangers that you're meeting are not there to hurt you, they're simply there to take you on a journey and teach you something you never learned before. And I thank all of you for that. This journey has been miraculous. I started taking drugs when I was a teenager. I was addicted to cocaine, was addicted to LSD, Valium, Placidil, Quaaludes, pot, alcohol, LSD, MDA, UCLA. I was basically a flexible drug addict. You know, I was flexible. And I came to my first meeting when it was an Alcoholics Anonymous program only. It was AA and NA. And I ended up going to a meeting while I was in Hawthorne Community Mental Ward. I was just visiting, doing a little bead work, a little ashtray making, trying, you know. And they told me basically, it came down to this. Either you come to this AA meeting, which I had already said no to. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Or they were going to stop giving me Valium. So at my first meeting, I was mellower than I might have been, but I still was like, I didn't want to be there. It was just a meeting. It was like filled with strangers. And I mean, these people were never in my living room. They never brought me drugs. They were horrendous. They were Lonely Hearts Club people. They had nowhere better to go on a Friday night. I had my room in the mental ward. I liked one thing about the meeting. I hated the other. And the other was enough to keep me away. The one thing I liked was I liked the fact that people would laugh at inappropriate things. I really got a kick out of that, because I always had that kind of sick sense of humor that seemed so rampant in these rooms. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure that one out. But this guy was up at the podium, and he was talking about how he was drunk one night, and he had accidentally, while backing out of his driveway, run over his wife. And everybody laughed. They were laughing. They all thought this was the funniest damn thing they ever heard. And his wife was even at the meeting, and she was laughing. She limped a little, but she seemed to have kept her sense of humor. I like that. But then they got to this God stuff. God got me a parking space. Why don't you just get a parking pass? God, everything. And I'm going, the wall is just going, coming down on me. And I got him in the back, I got my arms folded, I got that don't fuck with me look on my face, that so many people that are new have, especially the naked people in the back. They got their arm, I still sit in the back, by the way. Their arms folded, and I remember that leaving that meeting, I thought to myself, oh, look at this. They say they care. Nobody talked to me, Fuck. I was an asshole. But I didn't go back. I left that meeting and I didn't go back, even stopped taking the Valium. I just was going to get sober on my own. Johnny Siegel's program of recovery, I had been using it for years and it worked so far. You know, I'd been addicted to cocaine, so I stopped and I did acid. I did too much acid, you take some speed. Too much speed, you take some marijuana. Too much marijuana, you take some more cocaine. Too much cocaine, you take more cocaine. Ad infinitum. And I figured I would work on that. And I just wasn't going to get loaded no matter what. And 6 months later, my best friend Randy, who was my drug buddy, who was my tripping buddy, my drug buddy, my best friend, and just had a baby this weekend, as a matter of fact. He's still alive somehow. We're both alive. We're all alive. Happy about that. Yeah. He said to me, Johnny, do you want a drink? Now, I wasn't going to take another drink. I wasn't going to take another drug. I had decided I didn't need you people. That was it. And all I did was go like this. I just put my hand out. It was Randy. I always drink with Randy. And that drink, when it went down, it felt so good. I had been so tense and so tight and so afraid. And all of a sudden, I felt relaxed. I felt more like myself. I felt so good that I knew if I took another drink, I'd feel twice as good. And if I took some cocaine, I could feel twice as good, twice as fast, twice as long. And then at the end of the evening, when I was driving home, going about 25 miles an hour in the fast lane of the Santa Monica freeway, so as not to attract attention, I got arrested again, and the whole thing, taken down to jail, and I'm trying to punch out the cop. You know, the old song and dance. And the old song and dance, trying to find the line. It's funny, I never missed one on a coffee table. So, I decided the next morning that I had a big problem, and that I was going to have to think about this problem, and I was going to have to work it out. And I remember standing in this hallway of this rented house, because I had rented this house because I had actually burnt down my house while loaded one day. I remember all of a sudden, it was like it happened by itself, spasmodically. I found myself punching out this window, this plate glass window, and because I felt so empty. I felt all this rage about the fact that I was not going to take that drink. I was not going to do any more drugs. I used all of my power to do it. And all he said was, Johnny, do you want a drink? And I just went. Now, I did not say to myself, what did those lovely people in the 12-step program say? That I was powerless, that I have to turn it over. I did not think about you guys at that time. What I thought about was I had to find something good to take just to calm my nerves down, just to get my head straight so that I could figure out what to do next. 4 years later, I found myself going to my second AA meeting. I went there, and I sort of joined the program. I remember raising my hand at one point and saying, I don't believe in God, and I've got a problem with that. Because if you told me I'd have to believe in Santa Claus, that I would like to believe in it. I'd say, okay, I'd like to believe in Santa Claus, but I don't believe in Santa Claus, unless there are some young kids in the room, in which case I was wrong, and everyone here absolutely knows that there is a Santa Claus, right? But I, at that time, was a disbeliever. And I told him that was my problem, and that I knew I could never get... See, I realized at that point that you guys were the same as me. I looked in your eyes. I took that time to look in your eyes, and I knew that you had suffered. No matter who you were, no matter where you were from, you had suffered the same way I had with this big secret. With the secret of this big hurt inside me. We all had this deep hurt. Guidance counselors couldn't see it. Teachers couldn't see it. Psychologists couldn't see it. Doctors couldn't see it. Parents couldn't see it. They wanted to, but they just had never been there. And you guys had seen the other side. The only problem was you also had joy on your faces, brightness in your eyes, and enthusiasm for life that I lacked. And at the end of the meeting, I had a lady come up to me and say, Johnny, do you believe in spiritual matters? And I said, no, which was unusual for me because I always thought I was the big liberal. I believe, I'll try anything once. But the fact of the matter was, I had a closed mind about this thing. And they said, this lady said, Johnny, if you can make a decision to have an open mind about spiritual matters, and about these 12 steps, then you can make it in this program. Now, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could change a way of thinking. If you believed one thing for sure, how can you all of a sudden believe something else? But she wasn't telling me to believe something else. She was telling me to have an open mind and to live with an open mind and to see where that takes me. And I told her I would do that. I stuck around. I'm not quite sure what time I'm supposed to stop at. What time am I supposed to stop at? About 15 minutes? Okay. Oh, wish I wasn't blind. I stuck around for the next year or so. And I would go out. I get loaded every 90 days. Every 90 days, something would piss me off. It was usually a resentment. Something would piss me off. And if nothing pissed me off, I'd find something to piss me off. And I'd work it. You know, it's funny, my sponsor always talks about Murphy's Law. He says that Murphy's Law works if you work it. And after being around for that year, it occurred to me, something occurred to me. Because everyone's got to pee. Yeah, oh, the barbecue. That's what's so nice about these podiums. Just... Now everyone's naked. Where was I? Oh, what? A women's workshop? Can we all go over there? No. See, resentments. I got a major resentment. I've wanted to go to a women's workshop for years. Just be a fly on the wall. It'd be fun. But anyway, guys, I'm kidding. I was going to these meetings and not getting sober. And after a year of that stuff, somebody came up to me and asked me how long I was sober for. And I said, well, you know, I've been around for about a year. And they said, yeah, but how long are you sober for? And I went, well, a few days. And they didn't care. They didn't give a shit how long I was sober for. They just wanted an opportunity to give me a hug and wish me well. That hadn't occurred to me. You know, I figured everyone's judging me. You know, the whole world is my father. You know, and he's always there. But this guy didn't want to be my father. He wanted to be a welcoming friend. And that night, I found myself listening to Chapter 5. They always read Chapter 5 at all the meetings. It used to bug me. I used to want them to read. I say, well, what's the matter with Chapter 8? You know, read Chapter 7 for a change. I've heard Chapter 5. And the truth of the matter was, I realized why they read Chapter 5 at every meeting. And that was so that one day I would actually listen to it. Yeah. I mean, there's a thing, in Cocaine Anonymous, I've had the opportunity to go all over the country to meetings. And some parts of the country, including my part of the country, a lot of times when we read Who is an Addict, everyone like chips in all these lines. Who's an addict? You are. And the fact of the matter is at first I thought it was very amusing. I thought it was very funny. It was good that everyone was enthusiastic about the piece. But the truth of the matter is by doing that, I find if I'm talking, I'm not listening. And if I'm not listening in Cocaine Anonymous to what the foundation of the program's about, I'm dying. I'm dying just a little bit at a time. And what I'm also doing is I'm killing the new guy. And that was never my intention. My intention was just to make the thing joyful and fun. You know, I missed that part. But that night I did hear Chapter 5. Nobody was yelling out anything. I was hearing it. And I heard that half measures availed us nothing. The result was nil until we let go absolutely. And if you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And I realized that there were two kinds of members in Cocaine Anonymous, or in Alcoholics Anonymous then. One was the player. They're the ones that come. They set up the chairs. They put out the literature. They secretary meetings. They speak. They give guys rides to meetings, girls rides to meetings. They don't mind if someone throws up on their car. They give out their phone number. They work all 12 steps. And then there are the fans. They're the ones that come to the meetings. They take the coffee. They listen to the stuff. They take a ride. They work maybe the first 3 steps, say they're not ready to go on to the 4th step, and then work the 12th step, a lot. I was a fan, and that was really clear to me that day. that I had just been around here bullshitting. And why should I expect anything other? I'd always been a bullshitter my whole life. I'd never been willing to go to any length for anything or anyone up until that point. And I made this decision that day that for the first time in my life, I was going to try that. Try to do anything. When I had 6 months of sobriety, or 5 months of sobriety, I talked about this morning. We had a meeting on sponsorship and the history, and if you were there this morning, I apologize for repeating myself. But it's one of my more favorite memories of Cocaine Anonymous, and that was going to this meeting that a bunch of us had put together over at the Motion Picture Television and Movie Fund on La Brea Boulevard, and it was like one of those secret meetings. It was like everyone was sort of whispering to each other, we're going to have this meeting on Tuesday night, and we're going to talk about drugs. You know, and it was like, whoa, drugs, all right, we'll talk about drugs, you know, because it was kind of frowned upon to talk about drugs in AA, where a lot of us were going. And so we did this meeting, and it was fantastic. You know, everyone's talking about, you know, throwing around words like freebasing and talking about wanting to get a gun and shoot the birdies for being too fucking loud in the morning. And, you know, snorting up the carpet and paranoia and, you know, and they were out to get us, you know. I mean, there must have been so many of them, it's unbelievable, to have been watching all of us. I don't know where they get their manpower from. But we all felt really good. And at the end of that meeting, someone made a suggestion to take a vote. And we were going to take a vote as to whether or not to change this meeting from an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting to a new program that we would call Cocaine Anonymous. And it was voted down. I was really pissed off. I wanted to change it to this new program. But then I realized later that they were absolutely right. AA is AA. And part of their traditions is they're not allied with anyone else, which means they're not CA. But after the meeting, a few of us got together and said, well, tonight's Tuesday night. If we can get the room Thursday night, let's all come back. And 2 days later, about 20 people showed up in this little room. And at 7:30, I think it was, this girl, Veronica, walked up to the front table, and she pounded on the table to get everyone to shut up, because we're all chatters, like that. And she said, my name is Veronica. I'm a drug addict and an alcoholic. Welcome to the first Cocaine Anonymous meeting. Cocaine Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from their addiction. And nobody knew what to say next. We were all blown away. It was so apparent that something magnificent was happening in that room that day that nobody knew what to say. It took us at least a minute or two to start talking again about ourselves. But we laughed like I hadn't laughed in years. And I cried like I hadn't cried in years. And I felt that I had come home. Yeah. I started working the steps at that point for one reason. I had 6 months, and there were 3 people, Ray Grossa and Gil Moscow and myself, who were sort of with a few rotating people. We were sort of the general service organization, which meant that we could pretty much do whatever we wanted to. You know, those were the good old days. Now you have to take group consciences, things like that. You know? But we were able to slip a couple things in. One of the things we slipped in was Reggie LeMay and I were up real late one night in Denny's restaurant in Hollywood trying to figure out how the format should look. And we had a problem back then. People were coming to Cocaine Anonymous and they were using drugs. They were smoking pot. They were drinking. They were using opiates, painkillers, Valiums. You know, they didn't want to get too nervous. We don't get loaded here. It's from the neck up. You know, we don't take any drugs. And they say, where does it say that? Where does it say that? They said, we went to Alcoholics Anonymous. They said you couldn't drink. Didn't say anything else. They said, we came to Cocaine Anonymous. Said you couldn't do cocaine. All right, I stopped doing cocaine. What's the problem? And the truth of the matter was, they had us. They were absolutely right. Where did it say that? You know, nowadays, in order to deal with a problem like that, it would have to go through everywhere you guys live, every section, every county, every committee would have to pass committees, to go through trustees, to go through a conference, to be change something, which is the way it should fucking be, definitely. However, in Denny's that night, we simply changed the first step to cocaine and all other mind-altering substances. We asked the waitress to come to the table and we took a vote. So many other things. I don't know. Enthusiasm, yeah. A friend of mine asked me to talk about enthusiasm today, because enthusiasm was not one of my strong points when I came here. I was, when I was in high school, I ran for student assembly president, and my campaign was Fight Apathy, vote for Johnny Siegel. And that's around the time I got into using a lot of drugs. And then, as a joke, my friends would refer to me as Mr. Fight Apathy. What do you want to do today, Mr. Fight Apathy? Nothing. And this became a way of life for me. I became this apathetic, I had an exciting life. I'd wake up in the morning, I'd put on my bathrobe, and I'd watch Bowling for Dollars. It was pretty happy, even in sobriety. And my sponsor would talk to me all the time. He'd talk like Elmer Fudd, and he'd say, Johnny, I want you to be enthusiastic. And I said, enthusiastic? I said, I'm really not an enthusiastic kind of person. And he says, well, I just want you to be that today. And so I'd hang up the phone and I'd try and be enthusiastic. And it just didn't make sense to me, but I would try. And I'd try and have a good day and try and do all this stuff. And then the next time I'd call him up, I got these problems. And he'd say, Johnny, I want you to be enthusiastic. And finally, one day, I was really not enthusiastic. And I said, Howard, I do everything you say, but I looked in the big book, and I don't see it mentioned to be enthusiastic anywhere. He knew the big book back and forth, and I didn't. I was just guessing on that one. And he said, Johnny, do you know what enthusiasm is? And I said, yeah, sure. It's like, being excited and happy and, forcing yourself to enjoy yourself and this energized thing. And he said, Johnny, why don't you look it up in the dictionary? I said, all right, I'll look it up in the dictionary. And I went to the dictionary and looked it up, and I found it, and the definitions were just what I was telling him. It was saying happy and joyful and energy-filled, and then at the end, it broke it down into, it was either Greek or Latin. It broke enthusiasm down into Greek or Latin, and what it broke down to was en meant in or with, theism meant God. And I realized that all he'd been telling me to do is simply be with God. Be with God. Don't be with Johnny's head. I mean, I've heard a lot of people talk about the steps, and sometimes I understand what they're talking about, and sometimes I don't. But the clearest it's ever been for me, as far as a reason goes, of why I work the steps, is very simple. For me, it's because I come in here, and this is my only source of information, is my brain. And my brain is like a computer. And computers are funny, because if you program a computer with bad information, every time you ask it a question, it's not only going to give you the wrong answer, but every time you go back to it, it's going to give you even more wrong, and more wrong, and more wrong, and more wrong, and further and further and further out. What I didn't know was when I said I didn't believe in God, it was because I didn't believe in a God that a lot of people don't believe in. I didn't believe in a God that's going to change something for me, where I could sit back and say, okay, God, I'm just going to cruise here, and you do my life, and you do it good. What I found out was the steps are simply a roto-rooter program. It's a spiritual roto-rooter program. You work the first step, the second step, the third. You start going, and every time you get a little further on, it's like the roto-rooter man just stuck something down your mouth, and it starts going down your throat, and eventually it gets, by the time you get to the 12th step, it gets to your heart. And this voice within, this voice that is as loud, if not louder, than this computer ever will be. And the problem I had when I came here was I just didn't know that this voice existed because I couldn't hear it. I just couldn't hear it. And by coming around here and working the steps, I began to hear it. I experienced something magnificent when I got to the 7th step. I got to the 7th step, and I like that one because you didn't have to do any work, because I didn't have to be that enthusiastic about it, right? And I said, okay, I'll just ask God to remove my character defects. And I started going down the list, and it was a long list, strangely enough. And I asked him to remove my defect of jealousy, and I asked him to remove my defect of guilt and of my anger and rage. And then I got to sexual obsessions. And I said, God, please remove my And all of a sudden I thought to myself, what if this stuff actually works? What do you get left with? And looking back on this today, I realized that was my first journey into faith. Because I really was afraid to say it, for fear that it would work, for fear that something outside of myself would happen to me. I've always tried to make things happen. And what you guys were telling me was, do these things and things will happen to you in spite of you. I still had problems in sobriety. I had a lot of problems. I had problems, financial problems. I had relationship problems. I had some more relationship problems. Then later I got into some relationship problems. And at the moment I'm not having relationship problems, so I'm happy to say that. But there are always some other problems. And I remember getting to the point where I thought I was well. And I called up Howard and I said, Howard, I have done everything I could. I have worked all 12 steps. I have worked with other people. I've started meetings. I've done everything you've suggested, and I feel like dying today. I just feel the worst I've ever felt before, and it scared the hell out of me, because if I was feeling this bad, what am I supposed to say to the new people? They'll get scared. They see someone that's been around for a while feeling bad. And he said, Johnny, actually he said it like Elmer Fudd. He said, Johnny, he said, Jesus Christ, whether you believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God or simply a magnificent spiritual teacher. He said, Jesus Christ is definitely one evolved spiritual guy, right? I said, yeah, okay. He said, Johnny, Jesus Christ had 2 of the worst last weeks of anybody. I'm not a religious person at all, but I am told from friends of mine that are, that he kept coming back. Thank you. Let's see. I had a story told me that I'll tell you, and then I'll shut up if it's possible. All the people that laughed were naked, and they looked good. I was going through it another time. And I like to talk about going through it because a lot of times I get the impression that once you hit a certain level, you don't get your turn in the barrel. And that's, as far as I know, not what God's will is about. God's will is sometimes it's your turn in the barrel, and sometimes you got something to learn. And sometimes you is me. I prefer it when it's you. But I was given this story to read about this Indian brave. This Indian brave went out into the forest one day to hunt, and he brought all his weapons with him, and he went deep into the forest. And when he got into the middle of the forest, all of a sudden he jumped off his horse because he saw an evil spirit. An evil spirit was in the forest, and he jumped off his horse and he took his bow and arrow, and he aimed his bow and he shot his arrow, and all of a sudden this evil spirit turned into an eagle, and the eagle flew down and grabbed the arrow and threw it down. So this boy went back and grabbed his spear, and he went to throw the spear at the eagle. But before he could throw the spear at the eagle turned into a bear. And the bear came at him and knocked the spear out of his hand. And so the boy reached down and grabbed his knife out of its sheath. And before the boy could stick the bear with his knife, the bear turned into a snake and wriggled down between him and onto the ground. The boy went down after the snake and went to chop its head off. But before the boy could reach the snake, before the boy could chop its head off, the snake turned into a puddle of 1,000 tears. And the boy walked over to the puddle of 1,000 tears, and the puddle had become still. And he looked into the puddle, and what he saw was simply his own reflection. The only evil that I've ever known since I've been sober has been manufactured in my own mind. The only goodness has come from my heart and from your mouths. And I deeply appreciate that. I appreciate that on a daily basis. Howard used to leave me with a saying every time I saw him. And one time he said to me, he said, "Johnny, sometimes when you're floating on the sea of life, life will throw you a cinder block." He said, "Johnny, I suggest you don't hold on to that too long. Thank you. I love you."